particular customer or a particular organization will come to you and they will say, I want you to design this network for me, correct? So at that time, what will you do? You will create the network for them and they will tell you, this is the address range that I want. So because here your address range is fixed, you cannot really change this. So you have to create a range for them yourself, right? So we won't use this default range. So when we were creating the server that day, this is what we had used. So we were able to access our server immediately. But today, now we have learned how to create our own network, which we are going to do now. And then we will create our own network. So now understand, guys, this is a private IP range. Okay, what we are creating is a private IP range. So let's click on this create VPC, right? So when I click on create VPC, guys, you'll see that it gives me a set of things that I need to do to create this VPC. So I click on this, I get the VPC a name, right? So I just call this VPC 11th Feb. Okay, so I call it VPC 11th Feb. Then I scroll down. Now, see, this is where I have to give it the IP range. So I'm going to give the same range that we just used for the example. So I say 192.168.0.0 slash, what will it be, guys? This is the VPC. What will the slash number be? It will be /16, right? For the VPC, it is /16. So refer. What is it for the VPC? It is /16, right? So let's come back. So I'm creating the VPC right now. I've given the VPC a name. I've given the IP range for the VPC. That's it. Now I scroll down. I click the create VPC button. Okay, so create VPC button has been created or clicked. Okay, so now if you see, guys, my VPC has been created. So dated 11th Feb, I've created my VPC. So I go to your VPCs and you see, guys, there are two VPCs now. So the first one was already available, which is the default VPC. So this is the one that we have just created. If I scroll to the right, you will see that here under this one, the previous one is called as yes default VPC. The one that we just created, that is not the default VPC. Okay, so I scroll back here. Now our VPC is now created, guys. Okay, so VPC is done. So I just check mark that. Now we have to create the sub networks. So let's see, how do you create the sub networks? So on the same page, on the left hand side, guys, if you see under VPC, you have the subnets. Okay, you have the subnets. So let's click on the subnets. So when you click on subnets, guys, you get these three. So what are they? These are again the default subnets that are there, right? So if you see default subnets, so already there are sub networks also for the VPC that AWS has already given in general. But again, we are not going to use these subnets, right? We are not going to use this. So let's create our own subnet. So how do we do it? We click on this create subnet. Okay, so I click on create subnet. So now we can create our own subnet. So for that, first you have to select which VPC are you going to create your subnets in, right? So why? Because in one particular account or in one particular region, guys, you can have multiple VPCs also, right? You can create in your own region and your account, you can create even multiple VPCs. So that's why it is asking you the subnet that you are planning to create, which VPC do you want to create it in? Okay, so I select this and I select the VPC that we just now created, right? This VPC that we just created. So I select that one. So when I select the VPC, guys, immediately it pulls up the IP range that we have given for this VPC. Okay, so if you see, it pulls up the IP range. Now, so based on this VPC, I have to create the subnets. Okay, so based on this VPC, I have to create the subnet. So from the diagram, if you see, guys, I told you that when I create the subnet, the first two numbers are picked up from the VPC itself. So the first two numbers remain the common for all the subnets within the VPC, right? So it's the first two numbers. So that means here also, I have to take these two numbers. Only then it will fit within the VPC, right? So I call this my subnet. So I just call this my public subnet. Okay, I call this my public subnet. Now there are three availability zones, right? So you all remember that in all the different regions, there are three availability zones, right? So here, if you see, there are three availability zones. So I can create my subnetwork in any one of them. So I'm just choosing the first one. So I've given my subnet a name. I've chosen the first availability zone. And now here I have to give the IP range for my subnet. Okay, so I know that first two numbers have to be the same as the VPC. So it is 192.168, right? 192.168 is the first two numbers. What will the third number be, guys? The third number is the one which identifies the particular subnet. So I can choose one. Okay, so 192.168.1.0, right? And then I take the slash value. What will be the slash value, guys? It will be 24. Correct? For subnet, we have 24. So I have 192.168.1.0/24. Now I can show you something, guys. Before, see, I can click on this orange button to create the subnet, but before I create that, I want to show something to you. So I told you that the first two numbers should be the common with the VPC, right? So the system validates everything in the backend, right? You cannot just put something and just create it. It's not like that. The system validates everything in the backend. So let's say that instead of this 192.168, purposely I'm just changing this to 169, right? I put this as 169. So you will see that as soon as I try to create the subnet, it gives me an error, right? It's saying CIDR address is not within the CIDR address from VPC, right? So this subnet is not fitting into the VPC. Why? Because the first two numbers are not the same, right? So it's not fitting into the VPC. So to fit this subnet into the VPC range, I have to change this 169 to 168. So now both the first two numbers, which actually determine the network, right? So I have to keep the subnet the same as the main network. So now that I give 190 to 168, now if I click on create subnet, it will immediately create it. Okay, so now we have the subnet, we have the IP range, and if you see, it is showing in this subnet how many server IP addresses are available, 251. So there are actually 255, but 4 IP addresses are reserved for different things on the subnetwork, like broadcast ID, then the DHCP, DNS, and something else. There are 4 things. Okay, so that's why you have 251 available IP addresses. Right now, let's create another subnet. Okay, so we have 2 subnets here. First is the public subnet. This next one is the private subnet. Okay, so now let's create the other subnet, guys. So this one is the public subnet. This one is the private subnet. So let's create another one. So I click on this create subnet. Okay, I select the specific VPC. So again, guys, so I select the specific VPC, I come down, I give the subnet name. So this one, I'm giving the subnet name as private subnet. Then the availability zone, I'm going to select as the second one. Okay, so now I'm going to create both my subnets in different availability zones, right? Only if I create them in different availability zones, in case one availability zone fails or something, the second availability zone will continue to work. If you keep everything in the same availability zone, and if that zone fails, all your servers will be gone. That's why you should distribute it. You should keep it in different availability zones. Now, again, I give this a range. So this should be 192.168. So we've seen that it should be common for both. The third number, which identifies the subnet, can be anything from 1 to 255 in this case. So I'm just taking 2.0/ we know for subnet, it should be 24. Right. So the second subnet is also ready, guys. So I'm going to click on create subnet. Okay. So I've created the private subnet as well. Okay, so we have our VPC, guys, right? So this is the 11th Feb one, and now we have the subnet as well. So we have the one that we had earlier, and these two are the ones that we just created. the private subnet and the public subnet. So if you see, this is the private subnet and the public subnet that we just created. It is connected with our VPC, right? They're associated with our VPC, and these are the CIDR ranges. These are the available IP addresses. So now, guys, based on whatever we have created from this diagram, what else do we need to create? We have to create the servers. Let's create the server. So now, guys, now you will understand exactly why do we need to create the network and the sub network, right? Why do we create it? Why do we use it? You'll understand that now. So now we are on the VPC page. So this is where we created the VPC and the subnets. Now let's go to the EC2 page, right? So I come to the EC2 page. Right, so on the EC2, so this is the EC2 page, guys. Here I click on this instances. So here, guys, now I'm going to create a server, right? So I'm going to launch the instance. So I'm going to give it a name. So let me just call this as the public server. Then I scroll down, and this is the exact same process that we've done multiple times, guys. So I go down, I select the Windows server, again scroll down. This is the t2.micro. And for key pair, I'm just selecting the key pair. Let me just select one. Just create a new one for today. Okay, so I'm creating a key. Right, so what are we doing, guys? We are creating a server. Okay, so we give it a name. We give it the server operating system. We select the server operating system. Then this is the t2.micro, right? So we select the particular exact hardware that we want, right? So this has 1 GB RAM and 1 CPU. Then I've created a key pair. Now, guys, this is the relevant part here. Okay, so if you see now here in the network settings, it is asking me on which network do you want to keep this particular server. Okay, in which network do you want to keep the server? So I may have multiple VPCs, right? And in multiple VPCs, I may have multiple subnets also. So it is asking me exactly which VPC and which subnet do you want to keep this server in, right? So what do I do? How do I define it? I just go to edit. I click on edit. Right, so here if you see, this is the default VPC. If I select the drop down, it will show the VPC that I have created, right? So just now we created this VPC, right? So we select this VPC. Then it is asking in this VPC, which subnet do you want to create your server in? Okay, so you can select this public subnet. And when you're creating the public subnet, guys, you can just auto assign the public IP also, right? For any server in public subnet, you need the public IP. I'll explain this in more detail in some time, right? So once this is done, we now come to this section. So this is the important section that we have so far understood, guys. Earlier, when we created the server, what did we do? When we created the server, we just selected the default VPC itself and the default subnet, and we just went ahead with that, and immediately we could connect to the server. But now we have created our own VPC, we have created our own subnet, and that's how we have created our server in that. Right now we scroll down, so we go for the security group. Just create a security group. So here RDP is allowed. I'll just add another one. I'll say HTTP. Okay, so that's done. We've created that. Okay, now I create the server. You just click on launch instance. Now, if you see, guys, this server will be launched in the specific network that we have created. Okay, so if I go to the instances, you'll see, guys, that this server is being launched in the specific VPC, right? So let me just select this. So when I go into this specific server, guys, I see that if you go to the networking section, guys, it will show that you have kept it in the VPC that you created. Okay, so this server has been created in the VPC we just now created, and also the public subnet that we just now created. Okay, so this is the reason we create the VPC and the subnet, guys, where we can create our servers within different subnets. So now, why are we creating these different subnets? So that we can separate the different types of data, right? So I showed you the example of Flipkart. In this case, guys, what do you need? You have to separate the publicly available information and the private information of the customer, like database, age, etc. Right? So you have to keep those two different types of information in different places. If you keep this private information in the public server, all the customer data will be lost. The company will be shut down in a day, right? We don't want that scenario. So we keep the public information in the public subnet. We keep the private information in the private subnet. So that's why we are creating two subnets. Now, guys, you should have a question, right? If I try to access this server, right now we just created a server. We kept that server in the VPC we created and the subnet we created. Now, if I try to connect to this server, if I go to RDP client, if I click on download remote desktop, so this is how we access the previous server also that we created, right? Now, if I click on this, if I click on connect, you'll see that will keep trying to load. It will keep trying to connect to that server. It will fail, right? It's not going to connect. So what is the reason for this, right? So earlier when we created the server in the default VPC, immediately we were able to connect to that server as soon as we created it. But here, when we try to connect to the server that we just created, we are not able to connect. What is the reason for this? Okay, so we saw, guys, that we have created our server in the specific VPC that we created, and in that VPC also we have created it in the public server, in the public subnet that we created, right? You should have actually thought about this. I say that this is a public subnet, right? And I said that this is a private subnet. But the way we created both these subnets, what's exactly the same, correct? So, do you remember, guys, when we created both the subnets, the way we created them was exactly the same. We selected the VPC, we gave the subnet a name, and we gave the specific IP range. That's it. And so if the way both of them are created, guys, is exactly the same, then what makes them different? What makes one a public subnet and one a private subnet, right? That's the difference that you need to understand. So if you see, guys, right now, when we try to access the specific server, we are not able to do it. Why? Because the server is currently not connected to the internet, right? So although we have created a particular network, but it is not connected to the internet because we are accessing the server over the internet, right? We are accessing the server over the internet and it is not connected to the internet. So why is that? When we created a server that day on the default VPC, we were able to access it immediately. Correct? We were able to access it immediately because by default, that particular default VPC is connected to the internet. But here it is not like that. When we create our own network, we have to ensure that we are connecting it to the internet as well, right? So how do we do it? We do it using a device called as the internet gateway, right? We do that using a device called as the internet gateway, right? So that internet gateway makes sure that our entire VPC is connected to the internet. So it's just like a router. Yes. So it's just like a router. So this is the internet gateway. This internet gateway is connected to the internet, right? And this internet gateway, guys, when we create it, we attach it to the specific VPC, right? We attach it to the specific VPC. And because of this, guys, because of this internet gateway attachment, the entire VPC can access the internet. right? Entire VPC will be connected to the internet. But although the entire VPC is now connected to the internet, guys, there is just one more thing that we need to do to ensure that the sub can connect to the internet. Although we have connected the VPC, right? We have associated that VPC with the internet, but you need to tell the subnets, right? You need to tell the specific subnets how should it get to the internet, right? So for that, we need something called as a route table. So in the route table, we will define how should it get to the internet. So what do? We create a route table, and here we will mention if this particular subnet needs to go to the internet, it should go through the internet gateway. It should go through the internet gateway, right? So that's what we are going to see, and only then our server will become accessible. So what do we need to do? First, we create a internet gateway, right? We create an internet gateway, attach it to the VPC, right? So now the entire VPC has a path to the internet, but we need to mention to each of the subnet that if it needs to go to the internet, we mention it in the route table. If it needs to go to the internet, it has to go through the internet gateway, right? That's the path that it should take. Now, coming back to the question, guys, when I created the subnets, we created it exactly the same way, right? Then what makes it public or private? So this is the difference. The specific subnet, right? The specific subnet that you connect to the internet is called as a public subnet, right? Because it is connected to the internet. But the specific subnet which you do not connect to the internet, that is called as a private subnet. So in this case, if you see, guys, this public subnet, this particular subnet we are connecting through the route table, we are connecting it to the internet, right? So this becomes a public subnet, but this subnet we will not be connecting to the internet, right? Why? Because we have all our critical information, right? We have our databases, all the different types of customer information is in this server. So we do not want this to be connected to the internet. If it is connected to the internet, someone can hack into it and steal our data. So we will not connect this to the internet, right? That's why, guys, this is called as a private server. So this is called as a private server, and this one is called as a public server. The difference is because we connect it either to the internet or not. Based on that, it's called as a public and a private server. Now, irrespective of whether it is connected to the network or not, guys, these subnets can always interact with each other, right? Because why? They're all within the same VPC. So any subnet, right? Any subnet or any server within the VPC is able to interact with each other. Why? Because they are all part of the same VPC, same network, right? They are all part of the same network. That's why any subnet can communicate with each other. But to communicate with the internet, you do need to have an internet gateway and a route table. Without that, it won't be able to connect to the internet. Okay, so what is the route table, guys? The route table is basically just to define how should the subnet access the internet, right? So if you see, when we create the internet gateway, we have actually created a door, right? So if I have to give it a practical approach, I can say that here we have created a door to go out to the internet. Okay, but let's say there is a small kid. The kid does not know how to go outside the house, right? So you have to tell the kid, if you want to go outside the house and play, you have to use the door to go out of the house, right? So that's what you're telling in the route table. In the route table, you're telling the subnet, if you want to go out to the internet, go through the internet gateway, right? So you have to tell it, unless or else it won't know, right? So you have a path. So let's do this first. We will create the internet gateway first, and then we will create the route table. Okay, we'll create the internet gateway first, and then we'll create the route table. So let's see how to create that internet gateway. So on the same page, guys, on the VPC page, right? So here we created the VPC, here we created the subnets, on the same page, if you see just below that, you have the internet gateway and the route table. Okay, so first we create the internet gateway. So I come here. So very simple process, guys. So if you see here, there is an internet gateway already. And if you see that internet gateway is associated with the default VPC, right? And this is the reason, guys, as soon as you create a server in the default VPC, you are able to access it through the internet. Why? Because it already has an internet gateway. It already has an internet gateway attached to it. That's why you're able to access it immediately. Right now, but we have to create our own internet gateway. Okay, one particular internet gateway can be associated with just one VPC. One internet gateway cannot serve multiple VPCs. So right now I'm going to create a new internet gateway. So I click on this. So I say create internet gateway. So I come here. Now I give this internet gateway a name. So I'm going to call this IGW. So internet gateway IGW. I give it a name 11th Feb. Okay, so that's it. Now I click on create internet gateway. Right. So as soon as I click on create the internet gateway, guys, if you see, it shows the state as detached. Okay, the state is showing as detached, and it says the following internet gateway was created. So it gives the internet gateway a name. So this is a unique name with which it can be identified. And it says you can now attach the internet gateway to a VPC to enable the VPC to communicate with the internet, right? So by default, this is the reason that we don't allow it. So only when you want it, you can create that path and you can, okay, so now let's click on this attach to a VPC. So it will ask me which VPC do you want to attach it to, right? And it is showing only one because the default VPC is already attached to another internet gateway, right? So I can attach it to the VPC that we had created. So this is the VPC that we had created. So I select this one. Now I click on attach internet gateway, right? So now, guys, my internet gateway has been attached to my VPC. So if I go to the internet gateways, so you see this one is the default one. This is the internet gateway that we just created. And if you see, it has been attached to the VPC that we had created. If I try to access the server now, will I be able to access the server? I showed to you, when you create the internet, you are connecting the VPC to the internet, but the subnets do not have the specific path. So the subnet don't know how to access the internet or the path back, right? So we have to create the route table route also first. So we have to create the route table. Only then the internet gateway is actually usable. Until then, the internet gateway is not even usable, although it is available. So it's just like, you have a door, but you don't know how to use the door. You don't know whether to open it or shut it. That's how, right? So let's go ahead and create the route table, guys. Now we have to create the route table. So how do we do it? So now our VPC has been created. So on the same page, just above internet gateways, guys, just above that, you see the route table. Okay, so I click on route tables. Okay, so this is how it works. Now, every time you are creating a particular route table, guys, when you are creating a route table, by default, this route is actually added to each and every route table that you will also create. So in that route table, immediately a route is added where that subnet can communicate with all the other subnets within that VPC also. Let me show that, you'll understand it. So now I go to route table. I'm going to create another route table for the specific public subnet. Okay, so we create specific route tables for each subnet so that you can give different rules. Okay, so I'm going to create a route table. I'm going to call this as my public route table. Okay, so I say public RT route table. So it is asking me for which VPC do you want to use this public route table. So I select this VPC. Then I scroll down, click on create route table. Okay, so as soon as this route table is created, guys, you'll see here under the routes, immediately the default destination has been added. Okay, so the default destination is the entire VPC. So this subnet by default, this route table by default can communicate with any subnet in the VPC. Now, so I told you, right? We have when we create a particular route table, guys, this route table is created in general. Now, which subnet will this route table route for? That you have to show by associating it, right? So you have to associate this route table with the specific subnet. Okay, so you associate this route table with the specific subnet that you want to use it for. So you associate it with this particular subnet. So how do you do it? You come here to the specific route table. You come to the route table. Here you have this tab called subnet associations. So when you go here, you click on edit subnet associations. You see these two available subnets. So you have to choose which particular subnet do you want to associate it with. So I select this. So I select the public subnet. Right, that's it. So it will be routing only for the public subnet. So I click on save associations. That's it, done. Right. So if you go to the subnet association, now you would see that this route table is meant specifically for the public subnet. So whenever you create a route table, guys, there are two things that you have to do. First is you associate it with the relevant subnet. Okay, so you have created a route table, but that route table, where to which subnet does it belong? So you have to mention the specific subnet to which that route table belongs. Okay, so you associate it with the specific subnet. So this is what we have done here. Second thing is you have to mention a specific route that you are creating the route table for. Yeah, this will be a one-to-one associations. Yes. So now if I go to route, okay, here if you see the local route, okay, so if you see the local route is already here for the VPC, but now we have to add another route. So what is the other route that we have to add, guys, that we just discussed? So in the route table, what route do we have to add? We have to add the route to the internet, right? And the internet route will be going through the internet gateway. So right now, this route table has just the VPC route, the internal VPC route. Now we have to add the path to the internet. What is the IP address that we take to signify a path to the internet? To mention a path to the internet, what IP address do we take? Okay, so you click on edit route. So you're going to add a new route. So I click on this and you add the route. So what you do is the path to the internet, right, is called as a default gateway or a path of last resort where no other network is available. That is called as the internet, right? So basically mark that as 0.0.0.0/0, right? So this is the IP address that we take to signify internet route. Okay, 0.0.0.0/0. This is the IP address range that we take to signify the internet connectivity, right? So we mentioned this. And so what are we saying, guys? This is the destination, right? So that means we are telling the route table and the subnet, if you want to reach the internet, go through a specific path, right? So what will that path be? What will that path be? That path will be the internet gateway, right? So we are telling this particular, so this is the internet gateway that we just created. Okay, so we are telling the subnet, if you want to go to the internet, go through the internet gateway. Okay, so I'm telling you it again. If you want to go to the internet, go through the internet gateway. That's it. Now I click on save changes. So now our route table has been defined, guys. Okay, so we have created the internet gateway. We have created to the internet through the internet gateway. Okay, so let's go back and do the same thing. So now I go back to the server, right? So this is the server. So this is the public server. So I connect to that server. Okay, so I click on connect. I go to RDP client, scroll down, download remote desktop file. Click on this. And if you see, guys, as soon as I open the file, it is now ready to connect me. Okay, it is ready to connect me to the server. So if I click on connect, Okay, so here it is asking me for the credentials, guys. So I have to get the password. So I click on this get password, click on upload private key. Okay, so this is the key that we had created. I open that, I decrypt it. Okay, so this is the password and I put that in, right? And I access it, and guys, now I'm able to access the server, right? So this is exactly what we did in the default VPC also, guys. And if you see there, we just connected immediately, right? But when you are creating a particular network by yourself, you have to create the internet gateway, you have to create the routing table as well, and you have to, they will tell you, I want these many subnets in my VPC and so on and so forth, right? So when they are giving you that requirement, they will tell you that in my physical data center, I already have a specific IP address range. So something like 172.31. something something or 10.0.0.0, right? So they will tell you that this is the IP range that I want. And based on the IP range that they are giving to you, that is what you will create here. And that is why you need the VPC. You need the understanding of the VPC. You need the understanding of the subnet on how to create. That's what we saw today. So this will help you to create the different networks for your users. And when you're creating the, and this will be my private server. Okay, so I call this my private server. So I go down, I select Windows, same process. I select Windows, I select T2.micro, I select the same key pair that I created today. Now I'm going to keep this in my private subnet. Okay, so I select the VPC that we created. I select the private subnet. In the private subnet, guys, I'm not going to assign a public IP. Why? Because I'm not going to connect this server with the internet. Correct? So I'm not going to connect this server to the internet. Why? Because I have all the confidential information, etc., on this server, right? So I'm not going to assign a private IP address to it at all. So here, when you say auto assign public IP, it will, when the server is being created, at that time itself, a IP address is immediately assigned to it. So the for public server, we kept it enabled, but for auto assign public IP, I keep it disabled. Okay, so that public IP is not assigned. Now, if I scroll down, right, so just create this, I just use the same security group with the same security group rules. Now my private server has been created, guys, right? So the private server has now been created, is being created, guys. So my question to you is, right, my question to you is, the public server, we connected to the internet gateway, we had access to the internet, and we connected to it. Do we have access to, have we given internet access to the private server, guys? No, correct? We have not even given a private IP to it. So from the internet, right now, if I try to access that private server, will I be able to access it, guys? That's right. I will not be able to access it, right? So according to our requirement, I want to keep my private server out of the reach of the internet so that no hacker can come and access it. No hacker will be able to, no hacker will be able to get anything from that particular server, right? But if I don't allow any hacker to come in through the internet, at the same time, even I am not able to access it, right? Even I am not able to access it. So what is the solution for this? How can I access it first? So what we do is, I told you that every single subnet, that means every single server within those subnets, within the same VPC, right? In the particular VPC, every single subnet and every single server can communicate with each other. That means my public server, as I said, the public server can actually communicate with the private server also. So just like, we have accessed this server through a particular tool called RDP, right? So you have this RDP here, see, remote desktop connection. So when you go to remote desktop connection, this is how you can connect to any server, right? So from this public server, right? From the public server, because this private server is accessible, we don't really need the internet to access the private server, right? So from this public server also, you can access the private server. So now, because the specific private server is not connected to the internet, this private server is safe, and that's why we can communicate between these two servers very safely without any risk of going to the internet, right? So this is how we communicate, and that's why, guys, because from the internet we are going to the public server first, and from here we are going to the private server, right? That's why this server is also called as a jump server, right? Because we are going to that server, and from there we are jumping to the next private server. It's also called as a jump server. Many times it is also called as a bastion host, right? It's also called as a bastion. So in the real world scenarios also, guys, you will never be able to access the specific private servers directly, right? You always go to the public server first, and from there you will go to the private server. So you will have several public servers available, but there will be dedicated public server, one or two dedicated public server, from where you will be going into the private server. Okay, from there you will be going into the private server, right? So what we will do now is we will go to the, we are already logged into the public server. From there, let's access the private server. Okay. Okay, so now this is the public server, guys, right? So I'm just maximizing this, guys. I'm maximizing this. So what you see on the screen right now, this is not my system. This is the actual server. So you can see all the server details, etc. here. So I maximize. Now I go into the private. So I have to get the private server details, right? So from the public server, I access this. What I do is I select this remote desktop connection. Okay, so I go to this remote desktop connection. I go to this remote desktop connection. I minimize this. Now I have to get the private server details, right? So this is the private server. I click on that, right? So if you see, guys, this private server actually does not have a public IP. So if it does not have a public IP, that means it cannot communicate with the internet at all, right? It cannot communicate with the internet. So what do? How do we access this server then if it does not have a public IP? We pick up that private IP address, right? So we copy the private IP address. Because the private IP address is within the VPC, we will be able to access it. So as soon as I put that private IP address in the public server and I click on connect, you see it is asking me for the username and password for the private server. So now understand one thing, guys. I want to show this important thing to you. So if you see, this IP address that I show here, 192.168, right? This is the internal IP address. So this this public server also has a public IP address, correct? Now this private server, guys, does it have a public IP address? Yes or no? Okay, so it does not have a public IP address. So no public IP address, right? So here we have public IP address. Here we have no public IP address. So the servers are very smart, guys. This server, the public server, when it communicates with the internet, right? When it communicates with the internet, it will use the public IP address. But when it communicates with the internal server, it will use its private IP address, right? So that's why the two different IP addresses are used. To communicate with the outside, it uses a public IP address. To communicate with the inside servers, it will use the private IP address.